I welcome everyone to the 14th meeting of the Justice Subcommittee on Policing. Can I ask everyone to switch off mobile phones, I've just done it, and other electronic devices completely as they interfere with the broadcasting system, even when switched to silent. No apologies have been received. Item 1, decision on taking business in private. I'm inviting the subcommittee to be item 3 in consideration of our work programme in private. Are we agreed? Yes. Item 2, police reform. This next session is on police reform. I expect members will wish to cover issues raised in the Audit Scotland report published earlier this month, which provided a progress update on police reform. As members are aware, the Public Audit Committee took evidence on this report at its meeting last week. Members may also want to cover HMIC's thematic inspection work programme, which will help us with the ongoing work we're doing in relation to local policing. And I welcome to the meeting George Graham. There's so many Grahams, it's just wonderful. George Graham, QPM, HM Inspector of Constabulary for Scotland. And can I have straight to questions from members, please? Margaret, followed by John.
Good afternoon. I wonder if I could ask you about performance reporting. Audit Scotland at paragraph 114 said performance reports to the SPA board are now more selective and have less trend and comparative information. And I think the Chief Constable also said that he wanted to give weekly reports, but there was ongoing debate with the government about this. Could you comment further about that?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Convener, for the welcome. There's a fair bit I could say about performance management in the Scottish Police Service. The context or a little bit of history might be useful. The background to reform the ACPOS as was under the 8-force structure invested in and, along with colleagues within the Scottish Government and local authorities, or police authorities should I say, relied upon something called the Scottish Policing Performance Framework, which was an agreed way of measuring and monitoring policing performance across a wide range of indicators. That policing performance framework contained not just crime data, but a whole range of different qualitative as well as quantitative information. As we moved into policing reform and a single service, the Scottish Police Authority need to own, I guess, the whole approach to managing and overseeing policing performance. So if you want to know how the police service in Scotland are doing, the place to go for that, the authority to go for that, is the Scottish Police Authority. Now, of course, in all the reform processes, agreeing the performance measures and setting in place a performance measurement, monitoring and improvement regime has taken some time, so we're not quite there yet. HMICS, recognising that transitional work, stepped into a bit of a gap that was developing around about the February, March, April time, in fact maybe a little bit before that, before the actual new Police Service of Scotland kicked in, and set up something called Performance on a Page, where a number of analysts within HMICS managed to develop a little bit more around the Scottish Policing Performance Framework. That is now owned by the Scottish Police Authority, and we're hopeful that within the next few months we will see a performance framework and a performance monitoring regime come into being, which has the approval and support of both the Scottish Government and the analysts and statisticians within the Scottish Government and Police Scotland and, of course, the Scottish Police Authority, that we can all recognise a performance management framework which we all can have consistent data reported on. So I hope that makes sense. That's a kind of context with where we're at. The Audit Scotland report really referred to concern about national reporting of statistics before they were actually clarified, if that makes sense, before they were actually, we had any confidence in them. So, of course, it's possible Police Scotland gather performance statistics across a whole range of things, including crime, and so it's possible to produce them on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. But, of course, they change as circumstances develop. So as more information comes to hand, the final analysis, the final reporting of police performance figures usually is done on a quarterly basis, and they're agreed by all parties that we now have a consistent measurement on it. So it's important that we don't just publish everything on a daily basis, because we know that in a few days' time adjustments may have to be made because of a variety of complexities around police performance.
Yeah, are you confident that in the transition information isn't being lost, good comparative information that really would shine a light on performance?
Interestingly, HMICS has just completed a thematic, which we do every year, on performance management, performance data, and we selected 4 key areas around that, which were robberies, sexual offences, assaults, and this, the fourth one has just left me for a minute, but it may come back to me. And those 4 key areas, we analysed about 1,500 records over the summer, so July and August time, and we'll be reporting on that in early December. And I have confidence in the integrity and the accuracy of the data that's being compiled, and I've also got confidence that the kind of things which the Scottish Police Authority, and I guess communities across Scotland, would want to see in relation to policing performance are still being recorded and measured. It is interesting that we are still producing quite substantial data at a local authority level. So the local authority policing plans that were agreed and the local scrutiny and engagement arrangements that currently are in place, commanders across Scotland are appearing at those local scrutiny and engagement bodies and are producing statistical data and police performance data based on their divisional area. So there is lots of information still being shared at that local level. The issue around consistency is the national reporting, in other words, aggregating it all up and creating a picture for Scotland, which was done previously through the Scottish Policing Performance Framework. We need to be careful that we get that right, and that's what the Scottish Police Authority are working on just now. And I am confident that at some point in the next couple of months, I'm hopeful before the end of March, that we have a performance regime that the Scottish Police Authority own and that can be publicly reported on to everyone's satisfaction. I'm confident they're working on that, but I'll keep an interest in that being developed.
Just on the public reporting, and given the highlighting of the tensions in the audit report between Police Scotland, the Scottish Government and SPA, could you comment on the debate ongoing that the Scottish Government has concerns about this, and the Government's position is that its people are the only ones allowed to produce crime statistics?
Yes, I think that's not an entirely fulsome explanation of the issues. I think the issues at this present time are Police Scotland are in a position to approach the Police Authority or indeed produce statistical data which is collated on a daily, weekly and monthly basis. So the data is there. The challenge is that once it's out in a public domain, if there are adjustments made to it, people start losing confidence that the data is accurate. And so up until this year, the people who, I'm trying to think of the right word, it was the Justice Analytical Services within the Scottish Government. They were the only statisticians who are qualified, accredited to actually produce statistically ratified data, and they did so on a quarterly basis under the Scottish Police Performance Framework. Where the Government, I think, are quite rightly concerned, and where I would share that concern, or where Government colleagues are concerned, is that if unsanitised, if I use that word, data is produced, which has not been agreed by the 3 key parts of this organisational approach, in other words, the Scottish Police Authority, the Scottish Police Service and the Scottish Government, if they're not working off the same sheet, then very quickly we can get into some confusion about who owns the accurate crime data. And so Government raised that as an issue when Police Scotland quite rightly wanted to produce to the Scottish Police Authority loads of information which hadn't been through Government Justice Analytical Services. So we are now in the position of those 3 main parties discussing exactly how they will report on performance data in a consistent way, and I'm reasonably confident that we will get there in the next few months, but there's still work ongoing on that.
So it's probably safe to say that this is an area that's being monitored over the next months and the foreseeable future to make sure that sanitisation that you referred to is done on an equal balance and that no one party is taking too much of a lead, perhaps?
Yes, I think that's fair to say. I mean, HMIC's raison d'etre, if you like, under the new Police and Fire Reform Act isn't much changed from what it was before, and the effectiveness and efficiency of the Scottish Police Service is a key issue for us, as well as the effectiveness and efficiency of the Scottish Police Authority. And so we are as interested and will remain interested in the production of public performance data which is both accurate and it has integrity around it, and that is part of the reason we once a year go and do the sampling that I just referred to earlier. So we will continue along with Audit Scotland to have a considerable interest in the accuracy of that data. I would like to think that the Scottish Police Authority are the place that that own the requirement and have their own ability to monitor and have some auditing processes that satisfies themselves that they are confident and comfortable about the accuracy and integrity of data, but we will do it independently every year, and along with Government colleagues, police colleagues in Police Scotland, and the Scottish Police Authority, I'm reasonably confident in the next few months we will have something that is tangible and not entirely, I'm hoping not entirely removed from what we used to understand the Scottish Policing Performance Framework delivered.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's good. It came to a conclusion. I was going to ask if John could now come in, followed by Graham, followed by Kevin. John.
Thank you, Convener. Good afternoon, Mr Graham. So, Graham, just to follow on from that, I suspect, that the general public aren't hugely interested in the specific area that my colleague covered there, but what they would be interested in is the human interaction that gives rise to these statistics. So that performance management, as it applies to the general public, might be in how police deal with what might in the past have been seen as reasonably low-level issues, and the ability they had to exercise discretion as to how to deal with that. There's increasing public concern that as a result of a performance management regime, and this is something that has been raised with Mr House when he's been here, and he quite rightly says he has to account for a budget and explain that people are doing things. Have you any cause for concern that the important power that every police officer has, that is the power to exercise discretion as to how to deal with low-level issues? Because the ones you refer to clearly are significant matters that everyone would understand action has to be taken on. Are you aware of any pressure being applied there, or is there perhaps a misunderstanding? Do you have any interaction with the public about police operations?
Yeah, thank you, John. No, I mean, the first thing to say is I'm pretty sure most communities are still quite interested in crime data, so at all levels. So I do. Yep.
For the avoidance of doubt, I mean the machinations behind that and the production. Yes.
So we talk about.
I don't think the word machinations you would like to be attributed to you. Just to ensure that they're full of integrity. I think we'll settle for that. Yes.
I wasn't suggesting any lack of integrity. Maybe I need to get the thesaurus out, but you know where I'm coming from.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Convener. I think the core issue that you go to is this sense of target setting. Are there any? Has there been a removal of police officer discretion? Again, just to give a little bit of context, we in HMICS we have deliberately followed a policy over the reform period, so probably from the autumn of last year up until about now, of not overburdening the new service with formal thematic inspections. We think that was a sensible way. Both the authority and the Police Service of Scotland need some time to grow and to develop their structures and approaches to things. And we have been particularly engaged in a couple of areas, the local thematic, the inspection and local scrutiny and engagement, for example, is one which we completed in February. We've done a whole lot of background work on police governance, so working with the authority, with the Police Service and with Scottish Government colleagues, we've been involved around that whole issue of governance. But we've also been out and about. Our lead inspectors, of which we've got 6 now, and 1 local lead inspector for each of the territorial areas, so the north, east and the west we have a lead inspector for. They've been out and about meeting the divisional commanders, meeting the area commanders, chatting with staff, and also doing a whole lot of work with the local scrutiny engagement bodies to try and just get a flavour for the profile of that area, how it's developing. So we do have anecdotal evidence and information which we can tap into, but none of it has been done on a formal inspection basis. And so far, I wouldn't say I was overwhelmed with concern about target setting or pressure being applied to officers. Of course, there is a strong grip on policing performance at the moment, but I'm not seeing or hearing of any real issues in relation to what you would describe as pressure being applied to officers. So, of course, in Scotland we cherish and value that sense of a constable's discretion in how they approach things. And where I stand at the moment, and I don't have any hard evidence to support this, but you've asked for impressions, and my impression at the moment is it's one that we will visit next year through our local policing thematic, and I can maybe mention that a little bit later on, but we're at this moment in time consulting on, we're about to go out to consult quite widely on what our profile or what our action plan for next year should look like in terms of thematics, but one that we're getting quite strongly from a number of sources is to look at that local policing issue, that local to national, and that sense of discretion and autonomy that local commanders have to tailor policing requirements to their plan. Now, of course, part of the Act actually specifies that local policing will remain at the heart of policing in Scotland. The local policing plans that are done not only at a local authority level but at a ward level specify that should take cognizance of what local issues are. That, for me, indicates a fairly strong view that commanders, and indeed area commanders and officers on the ground, and the police staff that support them need to have some level of discretion around it. So that's what I would expect to find next year, but we haven't done anything formal in it yet.
Well, that's very reassuring, and I'm sure people will be pleased to hear that level of awareness. If, for instance, there was significant concerns arose in a particular area or out of particular, would you have the wherewithal to intervene and look at something maybe spontaneously or reasonably? So.
Well, the simple answer to that question is yes. If there was sufficient concerns being raised by anybody, including Steve House as the Chief Constable, if he was to raise an issue with us and ask us to do some independent overview of that, we could certainly do it if it came from anywhere, provided that we had a sense of there is a risk around this, and that is exactly what we did with the governance issue, for example. This committee itself raised issues around governance, others raised issues around it, members of the SPA themselves wanted us to have an independent examination or at least a review of that, and so we engaged with that. So we can do it, yes.
I was just going to say that I've had similar concerns raised with me and by really decent police officers on the beat, and that the discretion that they had was going in order that they could meet, make up the numbers, not make them up, but comply with the numbers. Can I ask you, who would any constable or police officer speak to about this, because they won't speak out publicly because it's not good for their career? So how on earth do they let you know, discreetly, yeah, this is happening? Maybe it's just one or two speaking to John, myself and other members of the committee, but it seems, the Longford was in the papers, I was being told about this. So how would they whistle blow or whatever it is?
Well, I guess there's a number of levels of response to that, Convener. The first thing I think is police officers are usually pretty good at speaking out. They usually find a way, and at this occasion you're suggesting it is through yourself as elected representative. So if there is concerns like that...
It's disparate because it's to different individuals, but if there was a central place, you'd begin to get a feel for whether or not it was just grumbling, they were just grumbling away because things had changed a bit, or there was really something that's going to damage community relations with local police officers because of, let's just say, an over-aggressive attitude to perhaps hitting targets.
Well, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. It's at what point do you hear the grumblings of officers who are now being challenged, held to account for some of their performance, and what point does that spill over into, I think that's damaging or difficult? And what I would like to see is an independent objective approach to this is I would want to see, let me see what your performance management measurement regime looks like, and we're not there yet. Let me see what the SPA are overseeing as a performance management regime, and then let me see within Police Scotland what is it you're actually trying to achieve, what targets have you got. Now, HMICS's role in this would be to make a commentary on what is the legitimacy of these targets, what is the, are they appropriate, are they sensible? We could have an independent view in that, so that I'm trying to imagine some exceptionally daft target that you would throw up just as an example, but if we saw a target that we saw, we cannot see a correlation between that activity and the outcome you're trying to achieve, we would say that. If our local inspectors, our inspectors in the territorial areas were picking up an anxiousness about this, and I can assure you that some of the cops are speaking to them about some things. This isn't one that we've heard particularly strongly as of yet, but we've certainly heard other things which we can address. If we were picking that up, again, my first port of call would be to have that conversation with Steve House, with Rose Fitzpatrick, with others, and ask for some explanations. What is going on? How are we doing this? But from my understanding just now, we're still not quite settled on what the SPA want in terms of a performance regime. So, again, we're only 7 months in, and I
just want to ask you, she didn't answer me, who would police officers anonymously, or maybe not anonymously, securely complain to, knowing that it wouldn't affect them in some other fashion by getting back to divisional commanders through the grapevine or whatever, really secure they can say stuff knowing that it's not going to come back on them? How do they do it? I don't know. I'm asking.
Well, they could certainly do that with us, and it would depend what it was they were complaining about. There are some routes, if they felt that how they were being treated was a bullying kind of thing. There are other routes for that.
About policing,
yes.
operational policing.
Yeah, and this is one of the wonderful challenges of a disciplined organisation, of which I've been privileged to be doing for 31 years. When I was a young traffic cop, I had targets. I was only in for 6 months. I wasn't very good at the traffic work, but you were given a target. You were to go out, and it was one way of making sure that I was productive. Now, if you didn't make the target, nothing. There wasn't any real sanctions, but people expected me to find disqualified drivers, to find stolen cars on the A74. People expected that was my job, and I would be doing it. So, if I was to mump and moan about that, and occasionally I did as a young cop, it would be, how sensible is it? Just get on with it, George, would have been the response from some of my managers. So we need to get clear about what is it people are being asked to do, and is that legitimate and sensible? And if it is, then we need to take a view on that and help others understand. If it's not, then I would have a role to play in trying to explore with Police Scotland, and indeed the SPA, who are the governing body of Police Scotland, as to why that was happening.
To phone you? To phone your office?
Oh, they certainly could do that, yes.
I want to let some. It's this on local police. This and the same issue about targets and local policing. So I think that I'll take. Yes, sorry, I was getting kind of not really getting to the nub of it there, Graham.
I'm grateful to Mr. Graham for explaining some of the background to this, but I know that from previous appearances from the Chief Constable, he will indicate there is no policy dictating KPIs for officers in the street. But like the convener, I receive emails and phone calls, and I'm stopped in the street by officers who are concerned. And you will have heard these discussions within committee previously. Yeah. Does HMI as an organisation pick up on concerns that are played out here and find a means to get behind that managerial voice to find out practically what's happening on the streets?
You put it much better than I did. The managerial voice. That's what I was
try my
at.
best, convener.
You're always doing that. Yes.
Well, the answer is simply yes, we can, and yes, we would. But so far, no, we haven't.
And can we get a yes, you will?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Can I ask? I'm now in my wee session. I've got one other supplementary to ask on the previous question.
Yes, but I don't know if you wanted to come back on that. You were sort of raising your eyebrows, and that usually means I want to come back in on local policing and targets.
Well, if I may, I think a route, and Mr. Graham maybe wish to comment on that. I think staff associations have a role to play as well there, and that can be done on a constructive basis. The level of engagement, although there's no direct involvement in operational policing, then there is. It is that balance, of course, and particularly applies to, dare I say, landward areas more than urban areas, where the requirement for the community to go along with, which is often a very small police presence, is crucial. And just as in the past, placing the wrong person in a rural community could destroy the previous incumbent's several years of good work, similarly, anything arbitrarily imposed, particularly if seen from afar, and Mr. House was keen to point out he isn't the big man from Glasgow, but that, of course, is how he's perceived in a lot of places. So, I appreciate it's challenging, but anything you could do to act or on any concerns that do come to you, and I have to say I don't know necessarily, Mr. Graham's the obvious first port of call for some of the concerns we're talking about here. I think there is an internal route first, and I would suggest that was perhaps best.
John, just going back to your question, Graham, I just want to be clear. If people were raising concerns, if my lead inspectors were out about raising the kind of concerns you're raising with me, that people felt they were being inappropriately set targets, we would want to understand what are those targets. Do we have a view whether they are appropriate or not? If we have a view they're not appropriate, we would certainly be taking some action to go and have dialogue and conversation, including with the Scottish Police Authority about what their role is in all this. But I come back to your point, John, about the Federation Superintendents Association. We've not picked up from divisional commanders as of yet a strong discomfort with some of the performance management processes that are going on, but we're just into a new round of setting the performance management regime, as I mentioned earlier on, from the SPA, and indeed the divisional commanders agreeing what their targets are for next year. So it may well be that some of the noise you are hearing, or some of the issues that are being raised with yourself, we're not picking up yet. But yep.
Alison, do you want to go on the same issue? So I'll let you back in, but let Alison have
It is on the same point, and it's really following up what John said. It's about how target setting or comparisons of people's performance week to week, areas' performances week to week, actually impacts on communities. And in my community in the North East, Stop and Search, for example, has increased by 47% in the 6 months that the organisation's been on the go. And students in Aberdeen are telling me that they're faced with a kind of policing that they've never had before. That concerns me. When kind of urban types of policing come out into rural areas in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, where we've had a very good relationship with the police, and very quickly you can damage the trust between communities and the police. And I would want to be reassured that that was something that was high on your agenda, because easy to do the damage, a long time to repair it.
I'll let Kevin come in on the same issue. I think you'll find the same flavour pretty well round the table, particularly those of us with rural and small communities, where a change in culture can have a huge impact on goodwill towards the police.
Convener, I've been asking a number of questions about Stop and Search, and including one just before lunchtime at general question time. And I think that the Cabinet Secretary responded quite well. I think, that communities are not bothered about certain things as long as they know the reasons why it's being done. And if they think that these searches are being done because there is suspicion or there is a special operation, then I don't think that would trouble people quite so much. But there is no explanation behind some of the things that are being done, and I think that communication needs to be got out there. Now, I would say, in terms of targets, Convener, and I'll come back in terms of local policing later if you let me back in, but in terms of targets, one of the things which I have found over many years being on a police board and being a local councillor is quite often the communities themselves are the ones who want to set a target in a certain area. And I'm quite sure if the local commander for Aberdeen was here, he would say one of the reasons why that Stop and Search has been used a lot more is because there have been a lot of complaints from the public in the city centre of Aberdeen about general behaviour in the city centre. I'm surmising. I don't know if he would say that. I would guess he would. Can I ask you, in terms of communication to communities about these things, why it may well be that we're seeing some changes in certain places? In terms of that communication, can you be helpful in ensuring that local commanders and the force itself in general get their message across about why they do certain things at certain points in time?
Thank you. I'll try and address a couple of these points in the general theme. One of the reasons that HMICS was intent on looking at local scrutiny and engagement, we did it along with the fire service, and we reported in February of this year the developing notion of local scrutiny engagement. Because quite clearly the Act recognised some of the concerns that you're all outlining just now, that policing at its heart should be local, and there should be local responsiveness to and differences. It's entirely acceptable there are differences. And so that was, I guess, the intent of the Act which went through the Parliament as the Police and Fire Reform Act, which actually said there will be local plans for local scrutiny engagement. Now, my question at the moment, and where I'm having done the initial thematic and given some thought to what good practice looked like in the local scrutiny engagement world, my question now is whether any of the local scrutiny engagement bodies that exist out there, and there are 32 of them, are getting some of the flavour and feedback that you're getting. And if they are, what are they doing about it? Because that entirely is in the meaning of the spirit of the Act, was that the voice of local communities should be made audible, if that's the right word, through the local scrutiny engagement work. So why we were intent on, in the summer of next year, going back to local scrutiny engagements is to ask the very questions that you're posing just now. Why have we got a different approach here than we had before? Or do we have a voice to say that? Is the divisional commander able to adjust the policing style, the policing methods to suit our community? Now, I think in some ways we need to encourage and empower some of the local scrutiny engagement bodies to get on the playing field with this and to start making some noise if they want to make noise. And indeed, some of the local scrutiny engagement bodies that we've seen are saying very, very positive things about their ability to influence the commander. Some of the information that you have might suggest that some might not be saying such positive things. So our question next year and our thematic will be, is that what's happening? Or do we have a one-size-fits-all kind of approach? Now, having spoken to the Chief Constable, Steve House, and having heard him speak at various events, including within this forum, he expresses the view and is as anxious as I am to make sure that policing, local policing, is at the heart of what police in Scotland do. And the SPA expressed that repeatedly. So I think the door is open. We just now need to start hearing some of these issues and teasing them out. And I think getting local scrutiny and engagement bodies to be much more engaged and involved in some of this. I equally have some thoughts about where the SPA need to be on this playing field, it will not be a surprise to the SPA for them to hear me saying that they need to be much more visible and vocal in some of this. If the kind of noises that you're hearing, they need to be hearing that. Now, they're out and about. The local members from the members of the SPA do have connections into the local scrutiny engagement bodies, and we now want to see some product from that. And from what I can gather, from what you're saying, that doesn't appear to be happening yet.
I'm just going to let Kevin come back in because you didn't answer a bit about communicating the whys. I think that's what
I think this is really important, Mr Graham, and I wonder in terms of your inspection regime, the new inspection regime, quite often before HMIC would say that there was lack of communication in certain areas. I think if people are given reasons and it's communicated with them why something is happening at that moment in time and why there may be a difference in what is going on, that can be really beneficial. The thing that I have found, and you've heard from others too, is that there is no reason given for some of the changes that have taken place. Now, there may well be very good reason for why something has changed, but that has not been communicated with us or with members of the public. And I think, that is key to all of this. And in terms of the trust factor, letting folk know what is going on in their own neck of the woods always helps greatly in terms of getting that trust from people. So in terms of your inspection regime, are you going to be looking at communication and how local commanders and others are talking to the folk in their area about what's going on in their area?
Thank you. I guess I was very clumsily trying to use the vehicle of local scrutiny and engagement to say that's where that communication can be at its most effective. That if local...
If they don't get it right.
Well, I absolutely agree, and I absolutely agree with the point you're making that often policing activity in a certain area can be much more productive if the communities who are involved in that policing activity understand what it's all about. So I'm absolutely on side with you around the basic point you're making that communication is critical to this. I suppose in my clumsy way I'm trying to suggest that we need to invest more in the role of the local scrutiny engagement bodies who are on the ground locally and who can challenge and query with the divisional commander and who can, I suppose, say to that divisional commander, if you are planning things, if you are changing things, we need to be the first to know so we can think about our communication strategy with our communities, the communities that you are serving. So I absolutely agree with you. And it would be impossible for us to do any of our inspection work without bumping straight into this issue of communicating.
I'd like to get Graham back in if we're keeping to this for this bit before I bring in Alison, because we usurped your questions.
You did, but if there's a keen supplementary, I'm willing to give ground.
Excellent.
Just two short points. Kevin's at pains to explain away the stop and search by the fact that there was probably a reason for it. Well, if there was, there would be a concomitant increase in the number of positive searches, and there hasn't been that. And the other point I would make, and I think that we need to be clear about, is do we all share the same definition of local policing? I don't detect that the board and the Chief Constable actually understand what everyone else means by local policing, and I think that there is a way to go on that. So it's really comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can make a comment just to finish off this area and then go on to a supplementary from Margaret's questions. You talk about if you hear concerns out there, then you'll take an interest. What irks me slightly in that response is that we've all read from the Federation Conference. They've raised concerns about inappropriate target setting. We've read reports in the Edinburgh press about concerns about changing cultures and policing in Edinburgh. And if we're receiving emails and we're being informed by officers about these changes, I would be concerned is an overused word, but I would be concerned if HMI is oblivious to all that happening out there in the public domain. And I'll just leave that aside. I don't particularly need a response to that. The supplementary in terms of Margaret's point about the statistics and the performance framework, what I wasn't clear about was in a year's time when we get the outcome of the performance statistics, will we be in a position to look back at the 8 forces and do a direct comparison before and after and know whether or not we're comfortable with our new arrangements or otherwise?
Okay, thank you. I will respond to your first issue because clearly that whole notion of hearing concerns, understanding how the police service is developing is of critical importance to the credibility of HMI's CS. So it would not be accurate of me, and I would certainly not want to mislead you to say that we don't hear concerns about a whole range of different things. The trick is, of course, the judgment as to at what point do we start exploring in any great detail, and indeed even move to a formal thematic inspection to say that we're not particularly happy about a certain thing and we want to understand it better. So I would give you some reassurance, I think, that if concerns at any level reach a cacophony where the risk looks greater than any other risk that we're facing, then we will do something about it. In terms of direct comparisons, I can't give you a definitive answer to that yet. I would hope so. I would hope that the policing service, which finished under the 8-force organisational structure at the 31st of March and reported, and was recently reported through the Scottish Policing Performance Framework the last time that would happen, I would hope that what we are actually able to do is make some direct comparisons with the vast majority of that. There are some things that you'll know that are fairly qualitative in nature and are difficult to make direct comparisons with. They're difficult to gather data on, but you still need to have a stab at it. And I'm keen to make sure that we still do that. So the answer is I would hope so. I will try and influence it, that it can be so, but I can't direct and I'm not in control of it. So I would hope that the SPA take cognizance of your issue on that and follow that line.
I noted that you're gathering information out there about the areas that you should be interested in the year ahead. But having been a senior officer in one of the constituent forces and now HMI for some time, what concerns, if any, currently, do you identify ahead of the gathering of that information that you think may be a priority for focus in the coming year?
I've mentioned one of them, which I guess is pretty close to all your hearts, and that is that sense of local policing. And I do take the point about interpretations of what do we mean by local policing. And I guess in terms of the Police and Fire Reform Act, local policing was fairly clearly defined around the divisional command structure and the 32 local authorities and the responsiveness to that. And so that is one area that we will want to revisit fairly early on and try and get a sense of what has a single national structure done and what is delivered at a national level and how does that impact upon local communities and how is local policing, as all of us would define it, would do that. So that would be the first thing, and that would be a major thing. I'm expecting, or I'm suspecting, whatever the right word is, others to raise that issue with us as well, and so we'll develop our thinking around what does it entail. It could be an enormous bit of work, but what does that entail as we get views from other people? So we'll develop that one. There are other areas, of course. Audit Scotland listed a fairly substantial action plan. There was about 5 or 6 recommendations within the Audit Scotland report, all of which we've got a keen interest in, especially around the governance of policing, that we get that right, that we start seeing the Scottish Police Authority adding some value to this debate and discussion. So we'll be very keen and interested in how the Scottish Police Authority start developing its structures and start delivering. It's similar for Police Scotland. It's inherited, if that's the right word, the ICT, ownership of the ICT going forward. So again, we're interested in how's that developing, the whole I6 process. And of course, we're intrinsically interested in the big success of police reform so far, which is operationally we are still delivering. The Police Service of Scotland is still delivering effectively, despite considerable financial pressures. And those pressures are not going to ease, as you know much better than me, and so we'd want to keep a keen eye on the efficiency and effectiveness. I was quite struck by the discussion, which I didn't get into much when I was here talking about local policing, and I think it was at the time of the counter closures and all of that going on, and it was that whole discussion about how much money do we have, what can we spend it on, what are our priorities, who gets to say, will be a very keen interest for us, and that will be wrapped up in the local policing, national policing debate.
You talked about local policing and the change in policing culture that was alluded to by my colleagues, particularly in the North East, and that you would expect... No, but earlier it was particularly mentioned about the North East.
Yep.
But you mentioned about you would expect local consultation to have occurred with the public and that whole sort of process. You then mentioned the counter closures. Would you have expected that in a similar vein local communities would have been consulted and informed of these options ahead of an announcement of a strategy which included over 60 counter closure proposals?
Well, I think the first thing to say is I don't think I mentioned the changing cultures. I think it was yourselves that mentioned that, so that's fair enough.
Response to changing culture.
Yeah. In terms of the counter closures, my understanding is that is and was being consulted on, and that consultation is just closed. Am I wrong on that? Because I think that was well debated at the last time we met.
The Chief Constable didn't really extend it, but allowed late submissions, and let me just put on the record here that we've put a call out for the subcommittee, extended a call for the views on local policing to the 10th of January, which would include that. So we're doing our own little call for evidence as well.
Without getting drawn into that particular issue, I would expect, I would expect on any significant changes or issues like that local communities, and this is where I think the local scrutiny engagement bodies have such a role to play, is that they could and should be consulted in all things that might affect them. Now that's, I'm not cited completely on how that consultation process went, but I would certainly expect that would be part and parcel of it.
I think I'll leave that aside at this time because I think there's still a way to go there. Go back to some of the issues that caused us as a committee real concern some months ago was the absence of a business case and the way forward in the reform agenda. From an HMI's point of view, you would hear these discussions and the reservations that were raised here at the committee. Was any action initiated from the HMCIC's office to look at what was happening? Because going back 18 months, members of this committee, or a Justice Committee in fact, asked for the business case to be produced and given to us, and as it turned out that was never achieved. Was there any activity within HMI to follow through on those calls and to find out why we couldn't get access to a business case or what else was going on behind the scenes?
So the simple answer to that question is I don't know. I started in HMIC in March of this year, by which time we were a month away from the reform happening. I working with the Police Authority, share that concern around the lack of a case. I think it was well exercised at the Public Audit Committee meeting the need for a case, business case, operational delivery case, corporate strategy, financial strategy, whatever you want to call it. There is an urgent need, I think, to have the various strategies involved, whether that be workforce planning, estates, finance, all ICT, all integrated and supporting each other in the delivery within the financial availability. So I have been absolutely exercised since I started in March in seeking to support the Scottish Police Authority and indeed Police Scotland and government colleagues in the delivery of what I would see as a critical business plan, which includes all of these things. But I have no understanding or background knowledge as to HMICS's role or influence up till March of this year.
Can I say, it wasn't my impression, and maybe other members of the committee will see it differently, but it wasn't my impression that the authority was overly exercised at the absence of this business plan. It was members of this committee who were exercised, and in fact at one stage were given an assurance that one was coming down the track. I think the signals must have gone against it at some stage because it never arrived. Had you been HMI, would you have expected the Inspectorate to take an interest in the absence of this report and to have done something about it?
I think that's a very tricky question for you to answer. A bit unfair. I didn't mean tricky in terms of.
Let me have a stab at it. Yes. I think that we have achieved some remarkable things in a very short time around police reform. I think it's quite incredible where we've got to. But if I had been HMI, I guess I would have been using whatever influence I have, and I can't direct anything. I can only inspect things and try and suggest what I would expect to see. I would be using all the influence I had to put as much energy as people could into designing the blueprint for policing and trying to create the various strategies that would support an overall corporate plan that then you would be able to see that against the finance that was available. So the simple answer is it certainly is something I would recognise the same concerns the committee raised. My impression, however, in my dealings with the SPA from March, April when I started, is that they have been exercised by this. It is just intensely complex and intensely difficult. So it's not my position to defend the SPA, but I think members of the SPA and indeed senior people within Police Scotland have been exercised by the need to understand. I think Audit Scotland said there's a lack of baseline information, trying to tease out the information from the complexity of 10 organisations and put it into some meaningful format to actually then make solid decisions around what the future should look like is not an easy task. So I think they have been exercised and are trying.
The first thing I would say before handing over back to the convener is that having asked you these questions, I have no doubt in my mind that your predecessor was equally exercised, and it would be indicative that whatever influence he did try and place was unsuccessful. Second thing I would say in terms of your defence of the SPA, that I think they became increasingly exercised as a result of the performances that both this committee and Justice Committee in the searching questions that were put to them. My concern is that given the responsibilities, and you've spoken about governance, and you know how interested I am in governance and accountability, I would have thought their first purpose in life would have been to deliver on that business plan in order that everybody understood the direction of travel and how they were going to get there. And it's still a disappointment to me that today we don't have one. But thanks, Camilla.
I'm just going to warn members that I've got maybe another 9 minutes or so because we have to go to the next thing and we must stop at 2:25 because the Chamber sits at 2:30. Actually, I'm in the Chamber at 2:30. I just thought I'd let you know that. So I've got, so if we can have swift questions rather than evidence from the committee members, although I'm guilty of that as well. Kevin, John, then Alison, please.
Thank you, Convener. I want to go back to comments that Mr Graham made earlier in the use of the term unsanitised data. I think that, data itself can be caveated at various points. One of the things which I think is extremely useful for communities, and particularly community councils and community fora, is the ability to see the stats in their area and at their monthly meetings. often these are caveated to quite a degree. Above that level in the former police boards, and I hope it will be the same in the local scrutiny bodies, we had the quarterly reports where you were able to analyse what happened a number of quarters back, previous years. You could see trends in certain months and all of the rest of it. Again, these were caveated to a huge degree. I'll give an example. You may have a situation where there's a piece of data in front of you which says that there's been 10 serious assaults in that time period, but 11 serious assaults have been solved, 110% clear-up rate, which, you know, used to baffle folk when they seen these kind of things for the first time, until it was caveated and it was said that, you know, one of the cases is quite possibly historical, or maybe even more of that in terms of the clear-up rate. Can we ensure that communities continue to get the service that they've had? Can we ensure that the local scrutiny bodies get all of these quarterly results as police boards did previously? And how can you, as the inspectorate, ensure that there is not much deviation from what went on before, which I think was actually extremely useful, not only for elected members in scrutiny, or police boards formerly now in scrutiny panels, but also for communities, which may, again, influence them into helping and formulate local policing plans, whether that be at ward or divisional level.
That wasn't a short question, but never mind. Never mind. It's just time as usual presses. Sorry, Mr. Graham.
Thank you, Convener. I'll try and give a short answer then, if I can. Firstly, to say, of course, I'm not a statistician or indeed steeped in statistics, so I think the use of the word unsanitised is probably not right, but never mind, that's the best I could come up with. The question around ensuring, I wouldn't want to give the committee a false impression of how much directive control HMIC has. We have none, really. We can influence and we can cajole and we can encourage. And certainly our role in relation to performance management will be to make commentary on the appropriateness or otherwise of the statistical measures that are being used. We also will make detailed commentary following inspection on the accuracy and the integrity of the data that's being presented. So as far as that goes, I will endeavour to do as much as I possibly can to make sure, firstly, that the Scottish Police Authority take proper cognizance of local scrutiny engagement bodies in the methods and the information they want. We'll take cognizance of what committees and what Parliament and indeed what the Government want to see from performance management regimes. And I will ask all the right questions to try and influence the SPA and Police Scotland to measure the right things and to report on the right things accurately.
And during your inspections, will you be talking to bodies such as community councils and other community groups, as has happened in recent times, particularly with the last lot of joint inspections between Audit Scotland and the Inspectorate?
Yes, absolutely. One of our ambitions for the new approach to inspection is to be a little bit more public friendly, if that's the right word, to get closer to the people who are actually receiving the service, and a lot of that will be getting out to community councils and getting out to various local areas and actually speaking to people, including, I think, at some point, people who have engaged with policing services, whether that's as a victim of crime or indeed as someone who's been reported for offences. So we'll certainly be, our ambition is to do some of that next year.
You're welcome.
Now, I'm going to roll the next two questions together. I'm sorry, I'm a bit anxious because we've got to do our work programme as well. So, John and Alison, what's your question?
Very briefly, a legitimate complaint about the previous system, Mr Graham, and like Kevin, I was a member of a police board, was that police board members didn't have the appropriate level of security clearance to ensure proper scrutiny of functions going on in that area. Now, these are clearly very sensitive matters, sometimes with the security services, covert surveillance, but significant human rights implications. Post 1st of April, can you give any reassurance regarding that, and is it an area that you will cover, please?
Alison.
My question is still about governance. I mean, we know that the SPA has had 2 interim chief executives and 3 directors of finance, and I'm interested in whether you think there's any lasting impact of that uncertainty around. I know that the SPA is now gone out to appoint the permanent staff, and I'd be interested to know if you'll be actively involved in advising the board in any way on those appointments of their chief officers.
Right. That's two succinct questions. Isn't that good to end in two succinct questions? John, your question first about security clearance.
Easy enough to answer. I don't know. I will find out for you, and it is something that we can assist with. But this, where I sit at the moment, I don't have information, so I'll find out for you, John. And the second one on governance, we've not been invited to be involved in the process. We certainly would assist if we were invited, but we have no locus, and we've not been asked to assist, so we won't as it stands just now. In relation to the interims, I don't think I'm close enough to know. My intuition, if you're interested in that, is that it's interim people, it's always difficult for them if they haven't got a commitment to the organisation beyond a short time. I mean, Audit Scotland have recognised that in their reform or their merger, their reform of the public sector merger report. I can't remember its exact title, but they recognise that the sooner you can get permanent appointments, the better. So that would be my intuitive view about it, but I don't have any information to suggest, and I've certainly heard Mr Emery, as chair of the board, suggesting that these interim appointments haven't caused any disruption, or any more disruption.
You've said you've not been asked. If I might just finally ask you, are you surprised that you've not been asked?
No.
I like you. You give single answers. Only my members would give short questions, though you did towards the end. Can I thank you very much for your evidence? We now move into private session, and as we're very, very short for time, can I ask the public to move with alacrity from their seats?